It's time for Michael Morales Torres and Lucha Libre Online.
Saludos a toda la afición de la lucha libre. Que les habla es Michael Morales Torres, integrante del equipo de Lucha Libre Online. Y tenemos el enorme privilegio de presentarles a nuestra invitada especial en la tarde de hoy, directamente desde Toronto, Ontario, Canadá, para el mundo, ex campeona de las Knockouts de TNA, ex campeona de las Knockouts en pareja de igual manera de TNA, la creadora de Wilde On with Taylor Wilde, Miss Taylor Wilde, in the house. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Just wanted to start the interview asking you, how did your passion for pro wrestling start? I mean, which was either the wrestler, the match, or the rivalry that engaged you enough to do this for the rest of your life?
When I was in high school, so around 16, 17 years old, I got into wrestling the most. And it was actually seeing Trish Stratus, who was the first woman who was beautifully stunning, but she was also fit and she could actually wrestle, because we were coming out of that Divas era where we still had bra and panties matches and it was very sexual. And she was the first woman that made it seem like, oh my God, you can be beautiful and strong and a superhero, just like the men are presented.
I'll translate that to Spanish. ¿Cuál fue la luchadora que la inspiró a ella a ser luchadora? Pues cuando ella estaba en high school con 16 o 17 años, hubo una persona que le llamó la atención y esa fue Trish Stratus. Estaba fit, era bonita, pero también sabía luchar. Veníamos de la época de las divas, en donde en aquel momento dado no era tan productiva la lucha libre femenina, pero Trish Stratus rompe esos parámetros y pues le inspira a ella a entrar a esta profesión. And the curious thing is, for Latin America, making your debut underage, it's piece of cake. We have people debuting at 12, 14, but in Canada and the US, that's something unusual. That's a huge deal. And you made your debut while, being 17 years old inside the pro wrestling industry. First of all, how do you felt, making your debut? Did your parents knew about this? Did they supported your decision? Tell me a little bit about this first steps in the pro wrestling industry for you.
Yeah, so being Canadian, I grew up playing hockey and other contact sports. So my parents were used to me being pretty aggressive when it came to sports. And I've always been a real tomboy. I always ran with a big group of guys. But when I became interested in wrestling, my dad was like, yeah, that's awesome. But my mom was a little bit more apprehensive. A baby girl, you want your daughter to become a gymnast or a ballerina. So to totally digest her daughter becoming a wrestler, it had its challenges. But she's so supportive now. She loves the entertainment factor. Like, she still doesn't love the wrestling, but she loves the vignettes and the storylines and the photo shoots. So both of my parents are very supportive, and I was always so energetic as a child. They knew that I was going to do something like this. So they let it happen.
I'll translate that briefly. Sus padres la respaldaron. Taylor Wilde hace su debut a los 17 años. En Latinoamérica es común, pero no en Canadá. Pero en Canadá está la cultura del hockey, de los deportes de contacto, y para ellos era común esa parte. Sin embargo, pues su mamá quería que su hija fuese bailarina o gimnasta, algo más femenino. Ya se describe a sí misma como una tomboy en aquel momento dado. Y pues su mamá eventualmente le gusta la parte de la fotografía, de los vignettes, de los videos, y esa parte pues le llama la atención, y posterior a eso pues fueron muy abiertos y la respaldaron durante todo el proceso. You did something really, wild on, and no pun intended, and moved to Mexico for a while to do some training over there, I believe in Monterrey, in the northern part of Mexico. So how was your decision? I mean, how do you wake up in the morning and say, hey, I want to move to Mexico and train lucha libre? Like, how did that happen?
Well, so my trainer, Rob Echeverria, he grew up very inspired by lucha libre. So when I was trained in North America, it had a very strong lucha libre flavor. And then Sarah Stock, Dark Angel, she is from Winnipeg, and she had made a career for herself already over there. And she was working a little bit like an international talent scout for other women. And so she actually called me and ODB and asked if we'd like to try it. And I was 18 years old. I was still living at home, but I thought, let's do it. this is awesome. I'd love to do it.
I'll translate that. Rob Fuego, su entrenador, siempre fue inspirado por esa cultura de la lucha libre mexicana, pero no fue él, fue Sarah Stocks, que la llama a ella directamente, Sarah Stocks, y le dice, mira, ya tengo una carrera en México, ya tenía 18 años, y llama a ella y a ODB, oye, vengan para acá, para México a entrenar, y ella como que, sí, es emocionante, vamos a hacerlo, y de esa manera que decide llegar a México. You know, before you signed with TNA and you did your whole career with them, you traveled to a pretty particular wrestling territory that till now we know it has like good ratings in terms of major pro wrestling, but before South Africa, we didn't know basically nothing about pro wrestling over there. So you went randomly over there with people like Kevin Nash, with Test, Scott Steiner, among others. What can you tell us about your experience about that wrestling tour in South Africa?
Yeah, it was amazing. We're so spoiled in North America because there's so much wrestling on TV and live events pre-COVID. So when we go to places like Europe, where it's not as saturated, the fans are so thankful, they're so more appreciative. But somewhere like South Africa, where they may have never seen pro wrestling, period, it was really this incredible experience because the fans, it didn't matter if you went outside and just bowed. They were like, yeah. It was a very different bonding experience between the wrestling and the fans because it didn't matter what we did in the ring. They loved it. They thought it was amazing. But as you know, South Africa is very racially divided still. And we went to some pretty scary places like Cape Town and Durban and Johannesburg. And there's a real divide between the rich and the poor. And I grew up in a diverse neighborhood, but it was really eye-opening as a person to see the kind of poverty that people are still living in. And it was actually probably one of my main reasons when I decided to retire from wrestling that I'd like to work in more of a community-based atmosphere, give back to the vulnerable populations. But yeah, it was a trip. I was like 19 years old. I go to South Africa to wrestle, and you know, it was just a trip. They've never seen wrestling before. So it was an incredible experience all around.
I'll translate that to Spanish. En aquel momento dado, Taylor Wilde a los 19 años tiene la oportunidad de llegar a Sudáfrica a luchar, un lugar donde no había visto industria anteriormente, y ella dice que los fanáticos estaban emocionados, estaban salvajes, porque cualquier cosa que hacía, todo era como que ¡sí! Estaban emocionados todo el tiempo porque no habían visto lucha libre, y todo, no importa lo que más grande quisiera o lo pequeño, siempre les gustaba porque en aquel momento dado no había lucha allá, pero la experiencia para ella fue, le abrió los ojos porque Sudáfrica, como ustedes saben, es el país más desigual en el mundo actualmente, y hay mucha, valga la redundancia, de desigualdad económica entre gente pobre y gente rica, y fue aparte de Sudáfrica que pues le abrieron los ojos referente a ese aspecto, como Cape Town, como Johannesburg, entre otras ciudades, que pues pudo ver la pobreza extrema en que vive mucha gente y otra gente extremadamente rica. Uno de los motivos por los que decide irse de la lucha libre eventualmente y dedicarse más a trabajo comunitario. Over that tour over there, you know, you worked with Andrew Martin, with Tess in the same venue, in the same company, and same everything. We don't know many about, you know, Andrew as a person. With the opportunity you had to share with him, a fellow Canadian as well, to you. So do you have the opportunity, you know, to speak with Andrew, with Tess at any moment, but of what you saw? How was him as a human being?
Yeah, you know what? I knew Andrew from the small time I had in WWE developmental as well, because he lived in Tampa, so he was always in and out of the school. You know, he was a real sweetheart. Like, he was a big, huge, muscular monster, but you know, they always say the bigger they are, the harder they fall. He was a real sweetheart. He loved wrestling. He was very polite. He was very helpful. And you know, he was really gone too soon. It was really sad when we lost him. I was still living in Florida actually when it happened. But yeah, he was a real gift to wrestling. He was one of the good ones.
Translate that, lo describe, le pregunto por Tess, por Andrew Martin, trabajó con él en Sudáfrica y también en su developmental en WWE, que esa es la próxima pregunta, de hecho. Y lo describe como una persona sweetheart, una persona amable, una persona, es uno de los buenos, y pues lamentablemente se fue mucho antes de lo que pensábamos. Speaking of which, you signed with WWE on 2006. a young girl full of dreams over there. So who was the first person that brought you in the WWE's developmental system?
So originally it was Tommy Dreamer. He was working as the head of talent relations, and he was the one that was like, that girl has something. And then it was actually Bill DeMont, who was the coach at the time of the developmental territory. I had a week-long tryout, and he just saw that I wasn't just your average female wrestler. I could hold my own with the guys. I guess I had the look that they were looking for. So it was definitely Bill DeMont and Tommy Dreamer who gave me my opportunity.
I'll translate that. ¿Quiénes fueron las primeras personas que le dieron su oportunidad para ingresar al territorio de desarrollo de WWE en aquel momento dado? Pues primero que todo, Tommy Dreamer es que dice como que esa muchacha tiene algo, pero Bill DeMott fue la persona que después del tryout de una semana finalmente toma la decisión de traerla al equipo. And speaking of which, how was your experience working in the old Deep South wrestling territory? Because we know many things about OVW or FCW or NXT now, but not as much of, you know, Deep South wrestling. So how was your experience, you know, living there?
Well, it was the deep, deep South. You know, I grew up in Toronto, which is like a major city. It's like the New York City of Canada. I grew up in a culturally diverse environment, different classes of financial situations, whereas McDonough, Georgia was white trash, to say the least. It was the first time I've experienced that really small town in the southern states where like literally everyone knew your gossip. You'd go get your morning coffee and they'd be asking you questions about your life, things you didn't know they knew. There was one gas station, one gym, one Walmart. Like it was really small town. So culturally, that was the first time I was kind of shocked. I'd been to South Africa, I'd been to Mexico. I felt fine. When I went to McDonough, Georgia, I was like, this place is weird. And you know, like, but I was thankful to be there. Like I had made it. I was working for WWE. I trained 5 days a week. And I did shows once a week, and it was a beautiful experience. But the cultural divides, you know, there was the Hispanic areas, there was the white areas, there was the Black areas, there was the Asian areas, and no one integrated. And I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. One of the reasons I could never live in the States is I don't believe in that shit. I believe that everyone should live in harmony and there shouldn't be cultural divides. But that was my biggest eye-opening experience there.
I'll translate that to Spanish. Le pregunto qué se sintió, pues obviamente estar en Deep South Wrestling, vivir en esa área de Georgia. Lo describe como que, ok, Toronto es el Nueva York de Canadá, es la ciudad grande, pero de repente vivió un tiempo en México, luchó en Sudáfrica, y de momento llega a este pequeño pueblo en Georgia, que lo describe como basura blanca, en donde todo el mundo estaba dividido. Tenías el área de los hispanos, tenías el área de los negros, tenías el área de los blancos, el área de los asiáticos, pero nadie se integraba entre ellos, nadie lo hacía. Como que todo el mundo hablaban de todo el mundo a sus espaldas, hasta hacían preguntas de tu vida, era como que fue un poquito incómodo, pero en cuanto a la experiencia, como que pues estaba viviendo su sueño, trabajando para WWE, entrenando 5 días a la semana, luchando los fines de semana, así que el pueblo, pues uno de los motivos por los que no puede vivir en los Estados Unidos es ese, pero la experiencia de la empresa muy buena. Speaking of which, how was your experience working, you know, those dark matches and house shows for the main roster in WWE? You were one of the few selected of that territory to do it. So once you arrived into the main roster's back part, like the locker room and everything, how did they receive you?
Well, I was in a really privileged position because I wasn't wrestling as myself, Chantel. I was wrestling as a Japanese boy. So I was under a hood, double mesh eyes, double mesh mouth, shoulder pads, flat chest, like wrapped, big baggy pants. So I think in a way I wasn't in direct competition with anybody really, because even though I'm a female wrestler, I was kind of being thrown into the cruiserweight division, or you know what I mean? I had a good experience, but Don't get me wrong, I'm no fool. I knew what I was getting into. I didn't expect, the marching band with hugs and a welcome party to greet me. It's a business and no one wants to lose their spot. So, I have a thick skin and I did the best I could with being young and with the experience I had. But everyone was really nice. You've been in this business long enough, there's the odd person you got to stay away from or just smile and, whatever. But I don't have any complaints other than if I were to do it all over again, I wouldn't be so polite. I wouldn't be so Canadian about it. I would be more of my own biggest advocate because no one's going to do it for you. You've got to be your own biggest advocate. And I was just probably too polite, too young, too Canadian. And, now that I'm 35 and a mom and a firefighter, I know how to stand up for myself better in terms of, I know my worth.
Translate that to Spanish. ¿Cómo se sintió llegar a los dark matches y a los house shows de WWE en el main roster? Pues ella luchaba no como Chantel, no como Taylor White, sino como Japanese Boy, en parte de la división Cruiserweight. Entonces, usaba con dos hoodies, se cubría la cara, le ponían el wrap en los senos para dejarlo aplastado. Entonces, era un hombre. Para propósitos, no era una mujer, era un hombre, era Japanese Boy. Y ella dice que no esperaba como que esta banda de todo el mundo abrazos y besos y fuegos artificiales. No, nadie quería perder su espacio en el camerino, estaban estresados todo el mundo. Y pues ella dice que si pudiese volver un poco atrás el tiempo, sabiendo que ella es ahora mismo bombero, era parte del cuerpo de bomberos de su ciudad, sabiendo que es madre y teniendo un poco más de madurez, no hubiese sido tan amable, tan canadiense al respecto como ella le dice, porque los canadienses son personas muy amables, muy polite, muy respetuosos, pero pues eso, hubiese abogado más por sí misma, porque si no lo haces tú, nadie más pues lo va a hacer. After that you were released, or you requested your release, depending on who you ask on the situation, from WWE, and you were granted a tryout match on TNA with Raisha Saeed in 2008. So how did that happen? How did you, from going from the deep south, extremely deep south, you went to Nashville. So it's like you decided to work for TNA. How did your tryout match happen?
Actually, what had happened when I parted ways with WWE, I gave Tina a call right away after my 90-day no-compete clause with WWE. And I said, look, I'm no longer with the company. I love what you're doing with the knockouts. It's really exciting. I'll stay in the States if you guys, want to use me. But they had just hired 13 new knockouts at that time. Wow. So yeah, so it was crap timing for me. So I said, okay, no problem. Like, I'm just going to go with the flow of the universe. I packed up all my belongings and I drove from Tampa, Florida, all the way home back to Toronto. And I enrolled myself back in university, and I was being a student again for about 6 months. And then TNA called me up and they said, we'd like to use you now. And I said, okay, great. Well, I'm not leaving Toronto because I've just, rerouted myself. And they flew me out. I had a tryout match, and I guess I knocked it out of the park, and the rest is history. So yeah, that was basically the extent of that story.
I'll translate that. En aquel momento dado, ella llama a TNA después que se acaba su cláusula de no competencia de 90 días con WWE y le dice, mira, me gusta lo que estás haciendo, quiero trabajar con ustedes. Filmamos 13 personas hace poco y fue como que, filmamos 13 personas, el tiempo no fue el mejor. Pues está bien, yo agarró sus cositas de Tampa, se mueve otra vez a otra ciudad para estudiar, y cuando lleva 6 meses ya relocalizada, es como que, oye, queremos traerte, es como que ahora va a ese tryout match con Raisha Saeed, la saca del parque como ella dice, y pues el resto es historia. You did a couple of matches, before getting to the big one. Many people consider it was like too soon. I don't think so. I particularly popped out when that happened, and that was, part of the story. You first, lose to Awesome Kong, who was the Knockouts champion back then defeated Raisha Saeed for the title opportunity on televised programming as well. And 1 week after, you defeated Awesome Kong, the unstoppable force over there. What was the first thing, and obviously won the knockouts title in the process. What was the first thing that went through your mind when the bell rang after the referee counted 3 and I was like, holy shit, I won. I am the new champion. I mean, they hired 30 new people back there. They have an incredible roster and I'm the person commanding this ship now. So what was the first thing that went through your mind when the bell rang and you were declared the winner?
It was just like, this is it, girl. This is what you've been working for since you were 17 years old. This is your chance. Take the ball and run with it. And, I was just genuinely, there was a part of me as a wrestling fan that was just so excited. Like Awesome Kong was this character that we haven't seen in North American women's wrestling. And I didn't know it then, but I learned quick that we were this David and Goliath female version storyline where, the supervillain is getting chased by the quintessential underdog. And that's really who I am as a person. I've always been fighting for everything I have. I haven't been given anything easily. So when I won that belt, I thought, this is your time. Enjoy it. And fucking celebrate.
I'll translate that. Cuando ella, ok, historia larga corta, Taylor Wilde debuta en la programación de TNA contra Awesome Kong como parte de un reto que hacían a las personas que estaban en el público. Awesome Kong le gana la primera vez, pero ella estuvo muy cerca de lograrlo. La segunda lucha que tuvo fue contra Raisha Shahid para una oportunidad, logra la victoria, va contra Awesome Kong y esta historia de David contra Goliat, el máximo rudo contra esa underdog, versión femenina, un personaje nunca antes visto. En caso de Awesome Kong, Taylor Wilde era la underdog y de repente se lleva la victoria y todo el mundo se queda como que ¿qué carajo acaba de pasar? Ella dice simplemente cuando lo que primero que viene a su mente es como que esto es por lo que ha estado trabajando desde que tengo 17 años, disfrútalo, este es tu momento y bueno, el resto es historia. After that, well, first of all, how was your experience working with the knockouts back then while being their champion? I mean, there was an incredible roster over there, specifically Awesome Kong. How was your experience working with her?
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. It was a completely different environment than what WWE was, because in the women's locker room, it was a mix of workers, wrestlers, and models who then had learned how to wrestle. So I would say that the relationships there were more competitive, maybe less genuine, whereas in the knockouts, we had all been wrestling on the independents for 5-10 years. We already knew each other really, really well. So it was more of a family. It was way more of a sisterhood. And at that time, Impact not only would have women's matches on the show, we'd have 2 women's matches, which was no major company had done that before. And we were the highlighted storylines. And Awesome Kong herself, she is an incredible human being. She's just the sweetest person. She would take her sweater off her back and give it to you if you're cold. And she's a big star in North America. She was a big star in Japan. She's never going to give you anything that you don't deserve. But once you make it in her inner circle and she sees that you work hard, you love wrestling, it. You guys are as thick as thieves. And oh, sorry, it says my internet's slow. So you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I
okay,
can still
sorry.
hear.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, and she taught me so much. I had been wrestling for I guess 3 years at that point, not that long at all, really. And she had way more experience than me. So together, we just worked on this incredible storyline that we basically took around the world for 3 years. So being in a story with her storyline was the pinnacle of my career. I'm so thankful for that time in my life.
I'll translate that to Spanish. En aquel momento dado, ella describe la experiencia backstage en WWE como pues era un ambiente un poco más nocivo, un poco más tóxico tal vez, por el hecho de que pues había la mitad de las luchadoras, pero la mitad eran modelos, todo el mundo estaba peleando por un espacio, eran bien competitivas, versus en las knockouts, todo el mundo ya había sido luchadora por 5, por 10 años, y era increíble ver cómo estaba esa hermandad. Entonces, referente a Awesome Kong, tuvieron la oportunidad de crear magia. Son Kong era esta estrella grande que era estrella en Estados Unidos, en Japón, donde quiera que había ido, pero pues una vez ingresas a su círculo, que ella ve que eres trabajadora fuerte, que eres buena, que estás inspirada en eso, simplemente entras a su círculo. Era el tipo de persona que se quitaba el jacket o el coat y te lo daba a ti para cuando tenías frío en el camerino. O sea, una persona muy amable, y ella describe como el tope o la cima de su carrera el haber trabajado con Awesome Kong. After that, you competed in the Knockouts Tag Team division where you won the tag team titles twice. How was your experience competing on that division after being basically your whole career working solo?
Yeah, well, it was like perfect synchronicity of the world, because here is Dark Angel Sarah Stock, who's from Winnipeg, Canada, and she spent the majority of her career in Mexico City, the one who got me to Mexico. And here we are, 8 years later, and we're a tag team. So it was an incredible, maze to get to each other. But I think because we had both been singles wrestlers for so long, and the Knockouts division was constantly growing, and it was constantly becoming more diverse, we took that as a massive compliment that, okay, now we're going to add another layer. We're going to make a Knockouts tag team division. And we were honored that we were considered to take that torch. And because we were different than other American female wrestlers, because we both loved lucha libre, we were both, super athletes. We were so excited.
Translate that. En aquel momento ahora pregunto por la división en parejas de las Knockouts. Toda su vida trabajó como singles competitor. De repente está en el mismo equipo con Sarah Stock, la misma persona que la lleva a México inicialmente, que también es de Winnipeg, que es canadiense al igual que ella. Y bueno, después de 8 años simplemente fue que una experiencia como que mind blowing. La puerta queda la vida. Estoy aquí trabajando contigo y ahora somos las campeonas en parejas de las Knockouts. Simplemente una experiencia pues del otro mundo. On 2010 you left TNA, but you left the whole pro wrestling industry and the square circle, and you've been one of the few that said, I'm done, and you were really done, because retirements in pro wrestling, it's like Ric Flair, he retired from WWE, then he went to TNA, and many people done that before. So why did you took the decision of, leaving the square circle, more than TNA, the whole pro wrestling industry?
Yeah, well, I had started actually performing wrestling shows at 18. At this point, I was 25. I had been on the road full time since I was 18. And, being so young, that's kind of a long career. And being 25, I got to the point where I was starting to worry about my future, because I was starting to feel physically really beat up. I hadn't finished my university degree. I had no real work experience. My resume, great. It says, 8 years you've been a professional wrestler. But if I were to break my neck, I'd have nothing to take to an employer. Besides, I can yell at the camera really well, and I can do a flip, which makes for interesting conversation, but I'm not employable. So from a wrestling standpoint, I was burnt out. I had an excellent storyline going with TNA for 5 years. But then management was changing at that time, and their focus was no longer the Knockouts. And I don't think I was at the top of their list. That's when they were starting to bring more models in, which was fine. Because I was burnt out of wrestling, and I was ready to make a more normal life for myself, for lack of a better term. So, I'm not someone who minces my words. I say I'm done. Because when I'm there, I put everything I had into wrestling. And when I was done, I was done. I needed a break. There's nothing worse to me than a wrestler backstage who's burnt out. Their matches are terrible. They're like not nice people, because you can just tell they're over it. And I never wanted to be that person. I felt so blessed to have the career I did that I knew it was time to go, and that was it.
I'll translate that. ¿Por qué motivo Taylor White es una de las pocas personas, de hecho, quien se marcha de la industria y dice, hasta aquí, ya, más nada, finito, se acabó, y realmente cumplió? ¿Por qué motivo? Porque se comenzó a preocupar por su futuro. A sus 25 años ya tenía dolores en la espalda, en el cuerpo, ya era como que, molestia, ya he trabajado mucho en esto, y entonces cuando se pone a pensar para el futuro, ¿qué le puedo ofrecer a un empleador en el caso de que yo me retiro, se acabe la industria para mí? Que sigue el caso de que me rompan el cuello. Que puedo gritar bien frente a una cámara, pero no soy una empleada que alguien pudiera tener o quisiera tener. No había terminado su grado de universidad, así que pensó en su futuro y por ese motivo es que se retira de la industria de la lucha libre para terminar su grado profesional y para enfocarse más bien en su vida futura. Le fue excelente. Ella tampoco quería ser esa persona que estaba en el camerino con dolores en el cuerpo, molesta y que no diera luchas buenas, así que simplemente toma la decisión por su futuro. I also want to say something else in Spanish. Taylor Wilde está disponible para todos ustedes. Tiene su canal de YouTube, Wilde On en YouTube, Wilde On en YouTube. Instagram como @RealTaylorWilde, Instagram @RealTaylorWilde, Twitter @RealTaylorWilde, de igual manera, igual que en Instagram, @RealTaylorWilde, ProWrestlingTees.com/TaylorWilde, ProWrestlingTees.com/TaylorWilde para todas las mercancías y camisetas, sea del podcast o de ella. Y lo más importante, Wilde On with Taylor Wilde, diferentes podcasts hablando de lucha libre femenina y de todo, disponible en Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Overcast, Radio Public, entre otros. Denle una oportunidad al podcast, créanme, vale la pena. Wilde On with Taylor Wilde. Spotify, vayan en el lugar más fácil, o Apple Podcast o Google Podcast, Breaker, Radio Public, entre muchas otras. Simplemente tomen de su tiempo, créanme, las conversaciones vale la pena. Va a tener a Tasha Steelz en muy poco de igual manera, al igual que ha tenido muchas personas como la misma Trish. So after you retired, you decided to focus. First of all, wise decision as hell. It was brilliant. Not many people think in their future. It's like, I want to be wrestling when I'm 70. It's like, I in my case, I practiced wrestling for 2 years. And at my first year, I was like, this fake shit hurts like hell. It's like DDP said it. It's like my back was destroyed. And I don't know how can someone do that for 3, 4, 5 decades. So it was a wise decision for you and your body. How did you decided, to start doing a podcast? How did that first episode, season 1, started? It's like you've been outside of the pro wrestling industry for so long. This is your way to get like, okay, I want to do this, but I want to do it my way. Was it your decision? Was it someone convincing you? How did Wilde On with Taylor Wilde happen?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And thank you very much for the compliment. I don't take that lightly. I really appreciate that. Well, what happened was I've been really fortunate over the past 10 years while I've been retired. I've had a call from a major company every few years to say, you want to come back? Is this your time? And I've never been interested. And then roughly around early March, I got a call from a major company asking if I want to come back. And I've been so impressed with where women's wrestling is right now. It's the first time since I left wrestling that I've felt motivated to maybe get back in the ring. And I said, yeah, you know what? I'm going to do it. I've been away long enough. I'm excited again. And my sons, they're old enough that they could watch and they could really get a good kick out of it. And my firefighting colleagues, they're super supportive of it. They've been bugging me to go back since I became a firefighter. So when I was just about to debut again, COVID happened.
Oh, shit.
Literally March 28th was when I was supposed to debut. So I didn't want to lose the momentum of what I'd been training for physically, mentally, getting ready for. And for years, I've always tried to write my story because I think I have enough interesting stories as a person that, maybe the people would want to hear it. But writing is really hard. Like writing a book is a skill. You got to sit down for hours a day. You got to be focused. And I'm not any of those things. So I thought this could be a way to do an audible autobiography, but talking with all my guy friends, my girlfriends, my family I've had in the business, and reliving our stories in the form of an interview. And mostly, there's not a lot of facts outside of what we know about normal female pro wrestlers. We know their height, their weight, what titles they've won, and maybe a few fun facts. Whereas I know that my brothers and sisters, they're brilliant. They're musicians, they're entrepreneurs, they're academics. And I really wanted to highlight and tell their stories because they're more than pro wrestlers. They're superheroes. So that was my idea, starting a podcast, telling my stories, but also highlighting all my brothers and sisters in the business.
I'll translate that to Spanish. ¿Por qué motivo nace el podcast Wilde? La llamaron muchas veces, le decían, Taylor, queremos que vuelva tal fecha, y Taylor le decía, todavía. Y cuando dice, ¿tú sabes qué? Me gusta cómo está la industria de la lucha libre femenina, me gusta cómo está moviéndose la cosa, ¿sabes qué? Voy a volver. Y cuando estaba a punto de volver el 28 de marzo de 2020, la pandemia ocurre, el COVID evita que ella vuelva a debutar, y es como que no quiero perderle el momentum, quiero también contar mi historia. Y decide entonces hacer este podcast Wild On con Taylor Wilde, de contar su historia, de su autobiografía, pero también de contar la historia de sus hermanos y hermanas en la industria, que pues además de ser luchadores son, como dice, entrepreneurs, son autores, hacen diferentes tipos de cosas, son músicos, y tener la oportunidad de contar su historia y de que el resto del mundo conozca la historia de sus compañeros, de sus hermanos y hermanas de la industria, simplemente es una oportunidad increíble. Okay, so you already got us curious. You mentioned March 28, 2020. That's a Saturday. Only Impact throws, their events on Saturdays. Well, AEW does, but not that often. Was Impact the company that contacted you to make, their return to the company?
I'm saying nothing. You know what? I will say, Impact has always had my heart, formerly TNA, for what they've done for women's wrestling. But I am a huge fan of NXT. Io Shirai, Shotzi Blackheart. There is some serious female talent. So I am coming back, and I am coming back soon, because my American visa has now been approved. But you have to keep your eyes peeled. I'm not telling you where I'm going to land. Just know that I am a big fan of all the companies. So you don't know. You just got to keep your eyes peeled.
So coming back, it's still an option on 2021 if the pandemic and everything gets solved.
Yes.
I'll translate that to Spanish. Le pregunto por qué me dice que estaba a punto de hacer su regreso el 28 de marzo. Y yo, 28 de marzo, sábado, NXT o Impact son los que tienen pay-per-view los sábados. AEW también, pero no hubo esa semana. Entonces me pongo a pensar yo como que ¿quién será? Él dice, no voy a decirles nada, hace silencio, pero pues le gusta lo que está haciendo Impact, siempre van a tener su corazón, pero también le gusta NXT, le gusta lo que está haciendo Yoshida y el resto de la chica, así que eso está excelente, y dice que sí, va a volver, en algún momento dado va a volver, vamos a ver cuándo. First of all, it's been more than an honor for us to have you as our guest, and I wanted to ask you a last question regarding women's pro wrestling. I mean, in the 90s, it was more gimmick bra and panties match until, Trish and Lydia happened that changed everything. But, the women's wrestling as we know it today, it was exactly what we were seeing like 10, 15 years ago on Impact or TNA at that point. Do you think the women's revolution, quote unquote, on WWE happened inspired on what you gals were doing on TNA before?
So, as a wrestling fan, wrestling always ebbs and flows. It's always changing. Whatever the focus is, there's always something that's in style. I can't say that we were the only ones that influenced the women's wrestling revolution where we see in NXT and WWE. But I will say, because we were given so much focus and we had so much fun, I think you could see when you watched TNA back in that day, we were all having the time of our lives. So I do think we changed the trajectory of where women's wrestling was going. And of course, we had to have an influence because WWE knows that our ratings were going up because of the knockouts. So they knew that was a good business move, and WWE is a business. So they knew they had to catch up. So I'm sure they were motivated. I can't say we were the only ones because there's a lot of incredible women's wrestlers in different promotions, but I will say we definitely helped influence it.
I'll translate that. Le pregunto si TNA y su división de los knockouts fue lo que inspiró a la revolución femenina que estamos viendo ahora mismo. Ella dice, bueno, no necesariamente completamente nosotros. Nosotros sí dimos ese empujoncito extra cuando ellos vieron que los ratings de TNA subían cuando tenían los knockouts, entre muchas otras cosas, la exposición. Hubo muchas personas en la industria que fueron parte de esto. Pero sí, definitivo, la división de las knockouts de TNA fue una de las cosas que ayudó a levantar la vara. Una vez más, antes de irnos, Wild On con Taylor Wilde disponible en Spotify, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Radio Public, entre muchas otras de igual manera. Pueden seguirla como Real Taylor Wilde en Instagram y en Twitter, en YouTube como Wilde On y ProWrestlingTees.com/Taylor Wilde para toda la mercancía. Miss Wilde, it's been more than an honor for us to have you as our guest. Always wishing you success in your life, both in terms of pro wrestling projects, but in your firefighter career, in your life as a mom, as a family member, as a human. Just keep enjoying life, stay safe from COVID and all this weird shit that's been happening due to the pandemic. And thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor for us.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor for me. So I hope we stay in touch, and I'd love to do this again if you have time.
Perfect, will do. Y sigan pendientes a Lucha Libre Online y a Wild On, la marca número 1 de Pro Wrestling y Combat Sports en español para más información.